Well, good afternoon. It's Charles here from Charles and Photography, and we're on the north side of Brisbane at Dolly's Rocks, and we're going to photograph the full moon coming over the Houghton Bridge. Now, I've already done a video once of a time lapse of how I actually photographed the full moon coming over the Shorncliffe Jetty. A lot of people like photographing the full moon, but I find that photographing the full moon, just the moon itself, is a little bit boring. We're around 1.6 kilometers away from the Houghton Bridge, and the reason I'm at this distance is that once you're over a kilometer and closer to 2 kilometers from your subject with the moon rising behind it, you actually will get very nice definition of your subject and of the full moon rising above the horizon. And this is, I feel, the best time to actually photograph the full moon. The reason being is that it is not as bright, so you actually can get a lot of definition in it. And tonight, being the full moon, it's rising just around sunset, which will be in a couple of minutes time. So I'm using my Nikon 200 to 500mm with my new Nikon D500. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-program my settings just so that when the moon comes up. So my camera settings for today: my mode is manual, my aperture is f5.6, I'm on ISO 320, and my white balance, I'm actually going to be choosing just auto white balance for today. So we're on auto white balance, ISO 320. Now, how do I know where the moon's going to come up? Well, I used a program called TPE, the Photographer's Ephesus, and I've actually lined up so that I know where the moon is going to rise up from. So I'm in roughly the angle that the moon's shooting. So now we're all set. Now, I actually do like using a remote shutter for exposures like this, because with a big zoom lens, it's very easy to get a bit of vibration in the camera. If you don't have a remote shutter, then just set your camera up to actually shoot timer delay. Around 2 seconds, that's all you really need. It'll just stop any of the vibrations that is going on. All I need is single exposure, single shutter, because we're not going to be taking photo after photo, and I'll actually be switching VR off because I'm on the tripod. So we have everything set up. Now all it's a matter is we just take a couple of test shots, and before we take a couple of test shots, we actually make sure that we're actually focused on the bridge, because that's where we want our focus point. I'm using back button focus on my camera here, so I'm focused. Now, because my focus point isn't going to move on the D500, just like my old camera, the D7500, and all the D7000 series, including the D750 and the D850, the D780, we have a little button on the side here where we can actually disable the autofocus. So I've actually disabled the autofocus, so I know that my camera is always going to be in focus. I'll take it off live view, we take a photo, it's slightly dark. Now it's saying 1/500th of a second, so I'll come down to 1/160th, take a photo. Now it looks much better. It's still a little bit dark, so we'll come down to 1/120th of a second. That's it. Now, because we're going to be both photographing the moon, even though when the moon just rises, it's not that bright, the last thing we want to do is blow out the moon. So I'm going to make sure that my image is slightly underexposed, because in post-processing, if I want to bring out the foreground a little bit, I can do that in Lightroom. Now look at behind me. Can you see these beautiful clouds? Look at that. It is such a beautiful scene. But this is not sunset. Sunset is actually way off to our left here. So we just have some beautiful clouds here, and sometimes this is what happens. I come out to do a YouTube video and other things like it'll look much better, but tonight it's all about photographing the full moon. I'm actually zoomed in at the moment at 260 mils. I don't want to zoom in too much more, because although the moon actually takes the same amount of time from when the time it actually leaves the horizon to sets, it actually looks like it's actually moving much quicker when it just comes off the horizon. It's better to be slightly back a bit to see where it comes up, and if I want to get a couple of zoomed in shots, to actually quickly zoom in. But if I'm going to do that, I have to make sure that I'm going to disconnect my manual focus and refocus on the bridge, or else all my images are going to end up to be blurred. Now we've got a bit of cloud around tonight, so I'm really hoping that we actually see the moon rise. If we don't get the moon rising just above the horizon, by the time the moon comes over the clouds, it'll actually start getting dark. This is the time when a lot of people, when they photograph the moon, they really struggle in the way they actually take photos of the moon. So some people struggle to actually take photos of the full moon when it's up in the night sky. And the reason being is that they don't realize how bright the moon is. What we have to do is forget about a nightscape image, and we actually just concentrate on exposing for the moon. That means that all the surrounding, let's say in Brisbane, and the moon comes up from over the Story Bridge, you're not going to get much detail of the Story Bridge or anything like that, because you can't have it both ways. The moon is so bright and everything else is quite dark that you've actually just got to accept one or the other, or do a blend of two images. So you might expose for the moon, get your nice mood shot, and then take a photograph of the scenery around. So if we're just exposing for the moon and we're forgetting about all the surroundings and all that, or the moon is actually quite high up in the sky, then you're looking, you keep your ISO at ISO 100, or at the most ISO 200, set your aperture to around f8 and your shutter speed to around 1/200th of a second, and you take a test shot. Now it might look a little bit dark, but that's what you want, because if you get it correctly exposed, you'll find that you don't have much detail. So if you're looking on the histogram, you'll actually see that the histogram shows a very dark image, but that's fine because there is just so much black in the image. So once you actually start editing that image, you'll actually find that you'll have a lot of detail in the moon. I just rely on what I see on my LCD screen, and I zoom in quite quickly and I go like, yep, okay, I can actually see the moon. I'll normally take a couple of photos at different shutter speeds. If it's still a little bit too dark, then what I might do is I might increase the ISO a little bit, but I don't try to shoot anything less than around 1/150th of a second. If we slow our shutter speed down too much, we're likely to get a little bit of blur because the moon's traveling so quickly through the sky. So it looks like we're in luck. The moon has just come up over the horizon here, so I'm actually just going to line it up, and I'll zoom in a little bit, hopefully, so we can actually see. That's it, it's right in the center of the frame here. So now, using the live view, I'm actually lining it up. This looks beautiful. I'll just check focus it once more. That's it, it's in focus. Use the shutter remote. Cool. Now that's a little bit dark, so what are our settings? 1/125th. I'll actually raise the ISO a little bit, ISO 400. That's really nice. Oh, she's actually, the moon's doing a very quick move. We'll actually try to reduce the shutter speed a little bit. Sorry, we'll reduce the shutter speed, 1/180th. Now, I've actually got to raise my camera just slightly. That's it. Take it off live view. This looks really good. Now, I'm actually going to increase the ISO. Now, the reason I'm actually increasing my ISO is the moon's actually not that bright. If we were in a night sky, the moon would actually be quite bright, so we wouldn't need to be raising our ISO as much. This looks really nice. So I'll raise the ISO. I can't drop down. Let's see if I'll drop down to 1/40th. So remember that as the moon is rising, it doesn't rise vertically. It actually rises on an angle. So you have to count for that angle. So as you're actually rising up, taking a few photos, you might have to readjust your framing. So keep that in mind. Now this is the beauty about live view, because I don't have to look through the viewfinder. I can actually just keep framing my image like this. So we were on 260 mils. So I'm actually going to back it out just that little bit, so that one, I'm getting more of the bridge, but two, I'm still going to get the moon in the image. So now, because I was on manual focus, I've got to actually refocus the camera now. That's it. I'm happy with that. Take it off live view. That looks really nice. Now, if we want to get much closer in, we can actually just tilt our camera sideways in portrait orientation to actually get a couple of shots, and that way we could actually get a much closer image. So I'm going to put the camera in live view, and all we're going to do is just rotate the camera. There. Now I can actually zoom in quite a bit more, and I'll readjust my framing. That's it. Now what I'll have to do is bring back my focus point for the bridge. Focus on the bridge. The moon's right in the middle of our frame. We're happy with that. Now let's take a shot. Oh, that is really nice. There's a little bit of cloud in front of the moon, and sometimes this actually adds just that little bit of sort of wow factor to it. So, well, this looks really nice. Now we are shooting at 280 now millimeters. Let's try, and we'll actually go in a little bit closer. Now the moon's moving a bit, so we'll actually try to, now at this distance there is actually quite a bit of movement, so it's not the easiest thing to frame. Okay, lock it in, and this is where you actually want a very good tripod head and a very stable tripod. We'll refocus the camera. That's it. Take a shot. So now we're at 390 mils, and I can actually see now that the moon is actually starting to get much brighter. So it's only been 5 minutes, and I'm going to have to drop my ISO from ISO 640, and I'll actually drop it down to ISO 400, and we see how we're doing. Wow, that actually looks beautiful. But already we're actually just about at the top of our frame. Now I've actually got to put back in live view, and we've actually got to back out a little bit. We'll recenter the image. Now when we're taking photos like this, even if it's the moon, if there's a foreground, I actually try to take a couple of different compositions. I might take a couple with the moon in the middle, a couple with the moon on the left, and a couple with the moon on the right. Because sometimes when your main subject is right in the middle, it doesn't look all that fantastic. So now it's actually just to the side, to the right hand side of halfway. So I'll actually reduce the ISO as well, a little bit more. ISO 320. That's it. Now we're actually on auto white balance, and looking at these images here, I can actually see the white balance is actually moving. And our last image here, it's actually quite blue. The reason being is that as night falls, the sky actually does get quite blue. I'm very happy with the photos I've taken already. So now we're actually going to turn the camera back into landscape orientation, and we're just going to have some fun taking a few photos of the full moon. Okay, so now we're back into landscape orientation, and I've actually zoomed in, and you can see on the video here as well, the moon is just through some clouds, and we're actually going to zoom in on the moon, take it off live view. Now because it's such a slow shutter speed, it's actually very good to actually not leave it on live view. I'll take a photo. Now this is where we actually zoom in it quite a bit, and we see what's going on. Now I can actually see that, one, I'm actually not in total focus, and two, I've actually blown out most of the highlights of the moon. So we're actually going to leave the ISO at 320, but now we're actually just going to raise our shutter speed to 1/160th, and we'll take a photo. Now I'll take the glasses off, but I'm actually going to look through the viewfinder to actually make sure that the moon is in focus. The problem is we've actually got a few clouds in front, so it might actually look soft, not because it's out of focus, but because of these small clouds in. That looks much better. It actually has like a ghostly effect, but it has a ghostly effect because you've actually got these clouds just coming over the front. Now I can actually see that the clouds are slightly parting, so we're actually going to take a chance that when I see just a clear patch, I'll actually just take a couple of photos. And on this video, you can actually see how bright the moon looks just when we're recording like this. It's just a white blob. Beautiful, look at that. We've got hardly any cloud. Well, this is where you get tricked because it looks like there's hardly any cloud here from this distance. But as I'm actually taking photos, zoomed in at 500 mils, you can actually see quite a lot of cloud. Now, like I said, remember, the moon's moving so quickly, now we actually have to reframe it a bit. And when we're shooting at whatever maximum focal length, now I'm using the 200 to 500 Nikon, but you could easily do this with, let's say, a 70 to 300 Nikon, or a Canon lens or whatever, because at 300 mil you're still going to get a very nice image. And if you want to get more magnification, all you have to do is, for the Nikons, we actually have a mode, it's called the crop mode, so we can actually crop it into 1.3, so you're actually zooming in even further in, because I find that sometimes if I'm not closing enough in, I'll actually use the crop ratio. Yes, let's say if you're shooting with a 24 megapixel camera with a 1.3 crop, you'll probably be down to around 16 megapixel. But even at 24 megapixel with shooting further out, once you crop it down, you're actually going to end up with the same image. So you might as well just shoot at that crop factor just to get more detail in the moon. Now, this looks beautiful. It doesn't look like we've got any clouds now. We'll take a couple of quick photos. Now it's actually getting quite bright. So what we'll do is we'll drop the ISO to 250 and we'll actually lift our shutter speed to 1/100th. Now if I'm looking at my histogram here, it's just actually showing me such a dark image. But if I zoom into the moon, this is actually showing me a very clean image, heaps of detail. So if I wanted to make sure that there is actually no vibration from my shutter, I can actually move my shutter actuation to what's called mirror lockup. So with mirror lockup, what happens is, I'll take it off live view, is the first time you press the shutter, your mirror goes up. Count 2, 3, 4. And then when you press it the second time, it actually takes a photo. So you don't have any sort of vibration from the mirror going up and down, which is actually called mirror slap. So if you actually want to be very sure that you're actually going to get a very sharp image like this, we press the shutter once, wait a couple of seconds, press it again, hey presto, no vibration from the mirror flap going up and down. So this moon is actually moving quite quickly. I've got to reframe it again, and I'm actually pretty happy with all the photos we've already got now. So we'll actually take one more photo in this direction. So we're just about done. We'll just take one more shot on mirror lockup. Press once, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There we go. Now it's 6 o'clock. So the moon's actually been rising for around 25 minutes. And we've actually got a beautiful afterglow of the moon in front of the bridge here. What I'm going to do is actually just zoom out, so we've got quite a lot of the bridge and a beautiful glow of the moon onto the water in the front here. Now, I've just looked at that. The moon is actually too high to get it. But let's do something else. What we're going to do is, how about we just focus on the bridge and we just get one shot of just the reflections, okay? So now, this is the only problem when we're using such a long zoom, 200 to 500, because this is a full frame lens, but on this crop censored body, APS-C body, it's actually equivalent, the view is equivalent to 300 to 750. So at 300 mils, I'm actually quite close. Now, because everything's quite dark, we're actually going to have to increase our ISO to 500, and we'll drop our shutter speed to 1/120th, 1/110th. Still more. We'll take ISO up to 800. Okay, how about now? I've actually got it framed. I'll bring it back down to ISO 500, and we're shooting at 1 second. Wow, that looks so cool. Now, I'll quickly put it back into mirror lockup, just because at 1 second exposure, we could get a little bit of vibration. Wow, that looks beautiful. Now, the moon's not in the picture, but all we're seeing is just the beautiful reflections of the moon on the water. So now let's just try and take a couple of photos in portrait orientation. What I'm going to do, I'll quickly stop the camera and you'll actually see what we're actually videotaping. A little bit dark, we'll come up here and I'll readjust it again. So now I've actually just taken a shot of just, I'm thinking like a nightscape image. I've zoomed it to 500mm for the bridge, and my ISO is 250. My aperture is f5.6. My shutter speed is 2 seconds. Now, whether I increase my ISO so I actually could shoot much quicker, I'm still going to with that sort of very bright image. Now, what happens if we actually keep these set and we actually just zoom in on? So let's do that. And all we have is a big white blob. So now the first thing I'm going to do is reduce my ISO to ISO 2, and now I'm actually going to increase my shutter speed to at least 1/160th of a second, and we'll take a photo. Now we're very close. Now to get a cleaner image, I've reduced my ISO from ISO 200 to ISO 125. Take a photo. That looks much better. Now we're just going to reframe because the moon is actually moving through our scene. Take a photo. That looks very nice. Don't think about this as a nightscape image. And now you cannot see anything around apart from the moon. So we're at 500mm. I'm happy with that. Well, good evening. I hope this video tutorial on photographing the full moon has helped you understand and also given you practical advice on photographing the full moon. As you saw in the video tutorial, I was actually using a 200 to 500mm lens. Now, you don't need a lens this big to actually take nice photos of the moon. A lens that reaches to around 300mm will actually give you very good photos. And as you saw in the tutorial, I actually took a couple of photos with my Nikon 18 to 140mm lens, zoomed out to 140. Now sure, the moon was actually quite small, but you will still be able to crop in quite a bit and actually get a fairly decent result. Sure, not as good as if you're at 300mm, but it'll still let you practice until you can actually get a bigger zoom lens. If you have any questions about how to photograph the full moon, leave them in the comment section below and I'll do my best to answer those questions. This is Charles for Charles N Photography. I will see you next time on one of my real world photography tutorials. Bye for now.